as you know, because you've been on my other channel, I think one of the big questions that people are asking is around the topic of hell. And even recently, Rebecca McLaughlin, I haven't actually read the book, but I've seen it's in the top. She said 12 of the toughest questions for Christianity is her book. And one of them, the very last chapter, is how can a loving God send someone to hell? So obviously publishers still think this is a question worth answering. To cut a long story short, and maybe we'll lose some subscribers on this, but you and I, all three of us, hold to the view that hell consumes and destroys. How big of a part of evangelism, apologetics, how needed is that conversation from your perspective?
Evangelism can largely be done without reference to hell. But in saying that, because that when I talk about hell, when I talk about missing out, when I talk about not being saved in the end, all I'm talking about is not having eternal life, because that's what I think it amounts to. So maybe it can't be had without reference to hell. It can be made without reference to the doctrine of eternal torment. But
most people will have that conversation without eternal torment. That's not generally a strategy. I mean, I've been through multiple alpha courses and introductions to Christianity, and eternal conscious torment generally doesn't come up as a topic.
Yeah, and while I have some time for those courses, I think there's a lot of good in them. It seems to me that to a large extent, I mean, they do talk about resurrection, but the central focus on the gift of everlasting life and being saved from death, which to me is the most important thing in the world, and how could it not be, in my opinion, isn't talked about so much. And that's because what they would talk about in its place is so unacceptable. Because what they actually believe is something that doesn't really nicely fit into a seeker-friendly evangelistic package, and so they stop talking about hell altogether. Which isn't good, because if it's part of the gospel and if it's essential as some people maintain that it is, you should talk about it and it should be part of evangelism. Whereas for me, what I believe instead of the traditional concept of hell is central to evangelism. It's, what if this isn't all there is? What if death isn't the end? And so that becomes the gospel. What if everlasting life is the thing? What if it can happen?
Yeah, I agree. And that focus on everlasting life and new creation has just blown open evangelism for me. It makes it so much more clear, and I don't have to start wrestling with everyone else's definition of death. And suddenly I've got new creation, hope, this world, what you see in this life that's good, are glimpses of new creation. That's something to be held on to when everything else is turning to poop. That's not it. That's not the end. And death is not the end. We've got something. And so that language is shared, but I don't have to qualify it.
That's right. And you can really, not necessarily qualify it, but you can really hammer it. You can really emphasize the things that you believe. And you can just use the biblical language to do so.